Hi, and welcome to another episode of Historical Markers. We're down on Tybee Island. I'm actually out here on the beach right now, and we're recording more markers down at the end of Tybee Island. And so let's see what kind of history we can find down here and see what we can learn. This marker was for Fort Screven from 1897 to 1945. It's been placed on the National Register of Historic Places. And then our surrounding it is a flower garden and a bigger sign that says Fort Screven. This marker is for Fort Screven, named for Brigadier General James Screven of Georgia, 1744 to 1778. General Screven fell mortally wounded November 22, 1778, near Midway Church, Georgia, while fighting for American independence. And next to that is this one that says, "This is the home of the 8th Infantry's American Army of Occupation, American Legion Post, 1923 to 1927. This is Post 154 from Tybee Island. This house says it's the Tybee Communication Center from 1906, Fort Screven Guard House. It says the Guard House. The Fort Screven Guard House was started in the spring of 1905 and completed in the spring of 1906 at a cost of $8,604, equivalent to $296,000 in 2024. It was lit with mineral oil until 1912 when electricity was added. The cell block rooms, walls, and ceiling were covered in decorative tin. The guardhouse has many different uses over the years. It was a prisoner of war internment camp during World War I, a jail for the city of Tybee, a Boy Scout headquarters, and most recently a community center and event venue for the city of Tybee Island. And then this other marker here talks about the Fort Screven National Historic District, 1898 to 1945. The Fort Screven District is nationally recognized historic district. The first buildings built for Fort Screven were the 6 Endicott period batteries, which would be used for coastal defense. All of them were constructed between 1899 and 1900. With the advent of the airplane, Endicott batteries soon became obsolete, and during World War I, half of the guns were dismantled and sent to Europe. Though classified as a coastal artillery base during World War I, the fort was used more for training than defense. It wasn't until the end of World War I, when the 8th Infantry was stationed at Fort Screven, that it became an actual infantry base. During World War II, Fort Screven was once again given a new purpose. It became the only U.S. engineer diving and salvage training school in the nation, training engineers in port repair and construction, as well as underwater demolition. This marker is the Fort Screven Bakery, building number 97. It was activated just prior to the Spanish-American War and inactivated at the close of World War II. Fort Screven served as a military post for almost 50 years. During that time, Fort Screven was a coast artillery installation, an infantry post, District F, 4 Corps headquarters of the Civilian Conservation Corps, and during World War II, the U.S. Army's only engineering, diving, and salvage training school of its type in the continental United States. The bakery is the first home in Georgia to be equipped with solar energy system that is tied directly to the power grid. That's interesting. Anyway, here's the actual building. It's hard to see much of the building because I'm here under this interesting looking tree. This area was Officers' Row. Officers' Row originally consisted of 10 houses, but only 9 remain, built between 1899 and 1910. The homes consist of duplexes and single-family homes, all built for officers and their families. The row began on the north with 4 duplexes that were built in 1899 for a sum of $6,150 each. That would be about $206,000 in 2022. The other 6 homes in the row headed south were built between 1901 and 1905 for a grand total of $67,000, which would be about $2.1 million in 22. In the spring of 1932, Lieutenant Colonel George C. Marshall arrived from duty with the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia. During this time at Fort Screven, Marshall worked hard to build a better relationship with Savannah and beautify the fort. His time at Fort Screven was short, and in 1933 he was promoted to colonel and sent to a new command at Fort Moultrie, South Carolina. After World War II, Marshall authored the Marshall Plan to rebuild Western Europe. He became the U.S. Secretary of State from 1947 to 49, and the U.S. Secretary of Defense from 1950 to 51. And in 1953, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for his development of the Marshall Plan. Fort Screven was deactivated in 1945 and subdivided before being sold off to private owners in 1946. The homes of Officers' Row have been private residences since, with most having been restored over the years to their former glory. So if we look around, I'm assuming, see, these are some of the homes. Regular Army values, the Girl Scouts. An article in the Savannah Evening Press on October 13, 1937 stated, "The troop, having no hall of its own, had to hold meetings, the first one place, then another." In 1935, through the efforts of General Van Horn Mosley, a beautiful rustic hut was erected exclusively for the Scouts. Mrs. Joe McNitch was the leader of the troop, which claimed a membership of 26. Dorothy and Grace Jackson, the lighthouse keeper's daughters. This is the card for Dorothy Jackson, the front and the back. And Dorothy Jackson, the older daughter of Tybee Lighthouse headkeeper George Jackson, was an original member of Troop 16 at Fort Screven, Georgia. Her younger sister Grace was a member of Troop 16 and then Troop 15. They both served as scribes for their troops, writing articles about troop activities printed in the Savannah Morning News. George C. Marshall and the Tybee Island Girl Scouts. General George C. Marshall and his wife Catherine were essential in forming the Girl Scout troops on Tybee Island. General Marshall, the commander of Fort Screven from 32 to 33, served as a reference for two of the captains, and Mrs. Marshall signed on as a local leader. The Girl Scout troop at Fort Screven formed in 1933. Troop 16, the first Tybee Island-based troop, had its initial meeting on May 28, 1934. Army wives were the initial leaders. The Army sponsored the troop and held meetings from 1935 at a scout hut specially built at the fort for the Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts. In 1937, Troop 16 disbanded, but Troop 15 took its place. Troop 15 met in the scout hut until 1944. In 1941, Brownie Troop 43 formed and also met at the scout hut. They remained active until 1944. After World War II, the troops moved to other meeting sites at Savannah Beach. This is the Fort Screven Fire Station, 1911. Located on our left, which I'll pan to in just a second. The Fort Screven Fire Station was built in 1911 for a sum of $2,860, which would amount to $84,000 in 2022. In 1912, the electric light system was installed for a sum of $63. Prior to electricity being added, it was lit using mineral oil. After Fort Screven closed, the building continued to act as the city's fire station until daily operations were moved to the south end of the island. The addition on the rear of the building was added after 1937. It is unclear when the bell tower, seen in the image above, was removed. The building is still owned by the city and has been used as everything from a teen center to its current incarnation as an art center and black box theater. The Fort Screven Library and Bowling Alley. It was built in 1910 for a sum of $6,343, which would be about $186,000 in 2022. The library comprised of 2 rooms in either side of the entry, and a bowling alley took up the back portion of the building. In 1938, 2 additions were added to the bowling alley, which included lavatories. The building became a private residence after deactivation of Fort Screven in 1945, and it was restored to its former glory. Anyway, here's the Fort Screven Fire Station. And I'm not sure which building was the other one, unless it's the other house here to the left. Enlisted Men's Barracks, 1899 to 1910. There were 4 enlisted men's barracks located on Fort Screven, but only one remains. The remaining enlisted men's barracks building was built in 1910 and could sleep 109 men. It was built at a cost of $24,523, which would be about $723,000 in 2022. All 4 barrack buildings had electricity added in 1912, and in 1938, due to overcrowding, all 4 buildings had their porches enclosed to accommodate more men. By enclosing the porches, they were able to add sleeping space for 15 more soldiers, or 60 men total. The remaining barrack building's exterior was restored to its original 1910 appearance in 2020 and is currently available for vacation rentals. And I'm assuming this is the building here. This was apparently the enlisted men's mess hall from 1924 to 1929. I can see that it does say mess hall on the door. Apparently it is now a part of the Mermaid Cottage's vacation rentals. Well, that was another episode of Historical Markers. I hope you liked what you learned in this episode, and we'll be back for another episode, so stay tuned and like, subscribe, and we'll see you in the next episode.